This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Twilight Show. I'm Graham Stanley and it's Saturday the 20th of July 2024. Thanks for joining me. Today I will be exploring what makes a great teacher and what great teaching looks like according to what is in some of the research and according to some of the educational experts.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
What makes a great teacher? It's the love they give, the hope they ignite in the lives we live. It's the way they believe when the world has doubts, the light in their eyes as they help us out. Patience is their anchor, kindness is their guide. With every word they whisper, they stand by your side. It's the stories that they tell, the lessons that they weave, the courage that they show, in the dreams they help achieve. It's the moments that they cherish, the times they sacrifice, the passion that they pour into every child's life. What makes a great teacher? It's the love they give, the hope they ignite in the lives we live. And bells fly, let wave and shake.
Welcome to the Twilight Show, everyone. That was Heart of a Teacher, an AI-generated song by Teacher Swift, created by Udio. Setting the scene for today's topic, what does great teaching look like? What makes a great teacher? I will be exploring both of these by looking at what is said about this in the research. If you're listening in live, I would love it if you could join me to discuss this. Please do so. I'd love to hear from you. So, for many years now, policymakers, educational researchers, and others have tried to determine what makes a great teacher with a view of trying to replicate the circumstances and culture and other factors in classrooms all over the world. Why? Well, for obvious reasons, a great teacher can have a transformative effect on learning, of course. And there are many studies that all point to the teacher being the single most important external factor on learning. And so it follows that if you can improve the quality of teaching throughout a school, throughout an educational system, then you can transform the learning of the students. But it can't be that simple, can it? Well, no, it's far from being easy. To begin with, just determining what great teaching is in itself a very difficult thing to do. Great or good teaching looks different depending on the context and culture. And as we all know, and there are so many variables. Great teaching changes depending on the subject taught and the age of the learners, to name but two factors. And there is a lot of interesting research, a lot of interesting opinions out there that are worth exploring. And that is what I plan to do today. I'll start by looking at what one leading educational researcher, John Hattie, has to say about good teaching. And then I'll look at some of the big organizations such as UNESCO and what they have to say about the subject of great teaching and great teachers, and then move on to some other opinions and evidence if we have time. All of this and more after the Teachers Talk Radio News.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This week on Teachers Talk Radio News, the King's speech at the state opening of Parliament outlined Labour's legislative programme for the year ahead, with 32 bills, including an ambitious education bill, the provisions of which will come into effect in late 2025. These include extending the national curriculum to all schools, including free schools and trusts, a statutory requirement for a curriculum review, qualified teacher status for all teachers. Currently there are 17,000 teachers who are unqualified and working in schools. Multi-academy trusts to be inspected by Ofsted. A register of all children not in school. Breakfast clubs will become a legal requirement, and the cost of branded uniforms to be capped. Also this week in the news, many students, parents and teachers will be delighted to hear the news that the UCAS personal statement is to be abolished. Joe Saxon, Chief Executive of UCAS, announced that the end of the personal statement was to open doors of opportunity and encourage applicants from disadvantaged backgrounds. Professor Lee Elliott Major, the Professor of Social Mobility, described this as a significant step to make admissions a little bit fairer. However, a number of critics pointed out that the UCAS personal statement is to be replaced by 3 questions, which almost exactly replicate the structure and content of the current UCAS personal statement. This week, All Saints Academy in Dunstable had lost its appeal to the High Court in its judicial review of its Ofsted inspection. 2 inspections in time came to very different conclusions about the school. This led to them questioning the methodology and appealing for the criteria to be revealed. Mr. Justice Kavanagh, in his judgment against the school, indicated that all such judgments must contain a degree of subjectivity, and that the High Court was not the proper place to settle matters of public policy. These should be left to politicians. Some legal analysts, while agreeing overall with the role of the courts, have pointed out that, of course, this judgment itself contains a high degree of subjectivity. Labour's new Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, has announced that term-time holiday fines for absence from school are to continue. They are here to stay. She stated that parents should honour their responsibilities and recognise the importance of attendance in schools, and that it was necessary to have some deterrent and consequences. Parents groups have pointed out the cost savings of taking children on holiday in term time far outweigh the current fines, and that largely this remains a tax on poor families. In the school year 2022-23, permanent exclusions reached a record high, up 44% on the year before to 9,376. School suspensions were also up 36%. Beth Prescott, education lead at the Centre for Social Justice, said, "These are truly shocking figures, with both school exclusions and suspensions at new record highs, combined with a crisis in school absence with the so-called ghost children at near record levels. 1 in 5 kids persistently absent. There's a pressing and immediate emergency unfolding across our schools." This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back, everyone. On today's show, as I said earlier, I'm exploring the following questions. What makes a great teacher? And what does great teaching look like? I'll be doing this by looking at what's in the research, what some of the experts say. And I want to start off by looking at something the educational researcher John Hattie published about the subject back in 2003, a paper entitled "Teachers Make a Difference. What is the research evidence?" which I think is still very relevant. John Hattie is originally from New Zealand, and he has been Professor of Education and Director of the Melbourne Education Research Institute at the University of Melbourne, Australia, since 2011. His research focuses on performance indicators and evaluation in education, as well as creativity measurement and models of teaching and learning. He is a proponent of evidence-based quantitative research methodologies on the influences on student achievement. And John Hattie is perhaps best known for carrying out the largest ever synthesis of meta-analyses of quantitative measures on the effect of different factors on educational outcomes. And the results of this he published in a book entitled Visible Learning. This book has been criticized subsequently, but whatever you think of this, I think his research is, well, I believe, still very influential. And today I'm going to focus on just one paper he wrote that he presented at the 2003 Australian Council for Educational Research Conference that looked at the meta-analyses that he did as well. So the thrust of why Hattie says he is interested in the research evidence in this paper of what excellence in teaching looks like is so he can discover the basis for developing appropriate professional development, the basis for education programs, and to highlight what it is that truly makes a difference. And he starts by mentioning previous efforts to identify good teaching and learning that has led to what he calls so-called idiot-proof solutions in classrooms and schools around the world. And these include trying to give teachers tight scripts, even tighter curricula, prescribed textbooks, national testing movements, and the like, all of which were introduced to ensure teachers teach in a particular way or concentrate on adopting particular sets of teaching activities. Hattie argues against this, stating that instead we should be looking at where the major source of variance in student achievement lies and concentrate on enhancing this instead. He reviews these variances in the paper as determined by recent studies and summarizes that 50% of the variance of achievement is due to the student. So more than any other variable, it is this what students bring to the classroom that predicts achievement rather than anything else. Of the other variables, home accounts for around 5 to 10% of the variance, as do schools, within which the school leaders are accounting for. Peers account for 5 to 10% of the variance, and the last variable is teachers, which is the most important factor after the student, him or herself, accounting for 30% of the variance. So what teachers know, do, and care about is therefore very powerful when it comes to student learning. Hattie moves on to discussing his work synthesizing over 500,000 studies to determine what has the greatest effect on student achievement, and states that excellence in teaching is what has the single most powerful influence on student learning. Excellence in teaching, so the teacher. The rest of the paper looks at what attributes excellent teachers have, what they do compared to other experienced teachers, and he reviews the literature to determine this with a colleague. They came up with 5 dimensions of excellent teachers. And then they expanded on these 5 dimensions to produce 16 attributes of experience that excellent teachers have. So I want to look now at those 16 attributes. The first is as follows. Expert teachers have deeper representations about teaching and learning. By this, Hattie means that experts and experienced teachers do not differ in the amount of knowledge they have about teaching strategies, for example, but they do differ in how they organize and use that knowledge. So the experts have knowledge that is more integrated, and they can relate current lesson content to other subjects, making lessons uniquely their own by changing, combining, and adding to them according to students' needs and their own goals. And they can be also much more responsive to students. So that's the first of the 16 attributes that Hattie defines or recognizes by looking at the research. Number 2 is that expert teachers adopt a problem-solving stance. And he writes that experts are more focused on solving problems with respect to individual students' performance in the class, which is different from non-experts, but experienced teachers who generally focus on teaching the entire class. So having a more of an individual approach and looking at the problems that those individuals have is a key factor. Number 3, expert teachers anticipate, plan, and improvise as required by the situation. So experts are better at anticipating the problems and making up ideas of how to solve those problems on the spot, rather than following rigorously a plan, for example. Expert teachers are better decision makers, and it's said that they can identify which decisions are important and which are the less important decisions. So they're able to keep a lesson on track, but they don't slavishly follow a lesson plan, for example. They have enough room in what they do in the during the lesson to allow for students' questions and comments, and have a nice balance between content-centered and student-centered instruction. What do you think? If you are listening in live, then please come and join me to talk about this, to discuss this. I'd love to have someone here to discuss these. It would be great to hear from you, so please do. Otherwise, I'll just keep on going. But I think a lot of this makes a lot of sense. So even though this was research, a paper that was produced in 2003, I think a lot of it makes a lot of still makes lots of sense to me. What has been said so far, and very interesting, I think too. I hope you agree. If you don't, I assume you're probably not continuing to listen to this. But anyway, right. So, what next? Well, number 5, expert teachers are proficient at creating an optimal classroom climate for learning. And so they're particularly good at increasing the probability of feedback in particular occurring. And feedback is one of the factors that Hattie identified in his study as being the most, I think it was identified as being the most important aspect as far as student attainment is concerned, student progress. And the experts' classroom culture is also one where error is welcomed, where students' questioning is given precedence. So it's very high, and engagement is the norm, where students can gain reputations as effective learners. So another interesting aspect. Number 6, expert teachers have a complex perception of classroom situations. They're more effective at scanning classroom behavior. They make greater references to the language of instruction and the learning of students, whereas novice teachers tend to concentrate more upon student behavior and put a focus more on classroom management. Of course, a lot depends on the student, doesn't it? Expert teachers are more context dependent, and there's a lot to this, which I won't go into. I think if you want more details, then I would definitely recommend reading the paper. If you search on it, then you will find it. It's freely available online. But in general, expert teachers are more context dependent. It means that experts need to know more about the ability, the experience, and background of the students that they teach. So they are more aware of what their students' needs are, I guess. Expert teachers are more context dependent. Again, makes a lot of sense. Expert teachers are more adept at monitoring student problems and assessing the level of understanding and progress, and they provide much more relevant, useful feedback. And again, feedback comes up again, which is definitely the providing more and better feedback is one of the most powerful single things that can enhance achievement, according to Hattie's studies. And expert teachers, as Hattie says, anticipate and prevent disturbances from occurring, whereas non-experts tend to correct existing disturbances. So because of their responsiveness to students, experts can detect when students lose interest and are not understanding and course correct. Experts can also filter relevant from irrelevant information, and they can better monitor, understand, and interpret things that are happening in the classroom in more detail and with more insight. And this is why and how they're able to give better feedback to the students. Expert teachers are more adept at developing and testing hypotheses about learning difficulties. And this information is used to better ascertain the effectiveness of the teaching and learning that is happening in the classroom. Number 10, expert teachers perform better than novices and seem to do with less effort. And it's said here that the experts are able to do this because their cognitive skills become automatic with extensive practice. And when they do this, they're able to free their working memory to deal with other more complex characteristics of the classroom situation. Number 11, expert teachers have a high respect for students, and the manner used by the teacher to treat the students to respect them as learners and people, to demonstrate care and commitment for them. These are all attributes of expert teachers. And because of this, the expert teachers are receptive to what the students need. Expert teachers are passionate about teaching and learning. And expert teachers engage students in learning and develop in their students and enhance self-efficacy and self-esteem as learners. So they're able in this way to motivate their students to master rather than just perform, and they enhance the students' ideas, self-concept and self-efficacy about learning, and set appropriate, challenging tasks. So 3 more left. Number 14, expert teachers provide appropriate, challenging tasks and goals for students. So the experts set challenging and not merely time-consuming activities. They invite students to engage rather than copy, and they aim to encourage students to share commitment to the challenging goals. So this idea of presenting students with with challenge is so important. 80% of most class time, Hattie is determined from looking at these studies, is spent with teachers talking and students listening. This idea of teacher talking time taking up most of the time in a classroom. And however, when expert teachers are examined, the students are engaging in challenging tasks to a greater extent of the time, and the teacher is not talking as much. Number 15, expert teachers have positive influences on student achievement. And Hattie states that the impact of teachers on students' achievement is often considered the gold standard of expertise. There's a lot more here, but I'm not going to actually go into it. I'm going to move on. So finally, number 16, expert teachers enhance surface and deep learning. And the distinction between surface and deep learning is that surface learning is more about the content, i.e. knowing the ideas and doing what is needed to pass. And deep learning is more about a greater understanding. So the idea of developing not just a surface level detail of the content, but an understanding of the meaning and the ability to actually apply that content or the meaning of that content to other contexts, etc. So those are the 16 attributes which Hattie, in this article published in 2003, has identified as being present in expert or great teachers. What do you think? If you're listening to this live, as I said before, come and join me and we can talk about this and what others say makes a great teacher, makes great teaching. I'd love to hear from you.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
Here's to every teacher who's made a mark, who's lit up the world with a single spark. Your legacy is endless, your impact profound. In every heart and mind, your love is found. Spirit of perfection, let's gather once upon all we want. Spirit of perfection, our brave and stood by everyone's within love. What makes a great teacher? It's the love they give, the hope they ignite in the lives we live. It's the way they believe when the world has doubts, the light in their eyes as they help us out. What makes a great teacher? It's the love they give, the hope they ignite in the lives we live. Our brain is stood by everyone's
And that was the second of our AI-generated songs, Guide and Light by Teachers Talk, thanks to Udio. So after exploring what Hattie said about expert teachers, I thought I'd look at something a bit more up to date. And I found an interesting article summarizing the discussion by educators attending a conference organized by UNESCO about this very subject. Held in Argentina in March 2023, the article was then written the month after, 10 years after Hattie published his paper. And there was a lot of comparison between different countries around the world on this subject, which made it really interesting. So let's now look at that and see what the differences and similarities are. So the article starts with these questions. How do the top-ranked countries in education achieve outstanding school performance? What are the reasons behind the rise of their school performance? And it went on to say that as teachers constitute one of the key elements behind students and schools' performance, a large focus of the conference was put on discussing what makes a good teacher. And experts from around the world gathered to share their country's perspectives on how to train teachers, analyze their performance, and motivate them. Item 1 discussed what was related to teacher training. What type of teacher training and for how long is important? And the UNESCO starts with the UNESCO Institute for Statistics defining a trained teacher as a teacher who has fulfilled at least the minimum organized teacher training requirements, pre-service or in-service, to teach a specific level of education according to the relevant national policy or law. So that indicates that there is going to be already a lot of differences between each country. And the article reminds us that there is no universal agreement on what being a trained teacher means or what the minimum requirements to qualify as a teacher are. Despite this, however, there is experience from top-ranked education systems which show consistent patterns regarding teacher training and education being ideal. And they include pre-service training, so usually a degree, with some degrees requiring classroom experience prior to taking them. In Shanghai, for example, it is necessary to complete a 4-year program followed by a 1-year in-service training to become a qualified teacher, and it's impossible to practice as a teacher in Shanghai without this certification. The importance of providing teachers with professional development was also highlighted. Question number 2, item number 2 was, should teachers be evaluated? They discussed this. Ensuring students are taught by good teachers can be carried out, it was mentioned during the conference, through evaluation. What that means is that teachers are evaluated in having and they need to keep their knowledge, for example, up to date on theory and practice, as well as develop knowledge and new skills needed. I thought this was kind of interesting. I do think that teachers, in order to be successful and effective, do need to keep up to date. But I also think that this is something that if you are a teacher, then you are going to be doing that anyway, because probably you entered the profession in order to help students learn. But I do also know that that can't be just taken as a given. I have, in my experience, I have come across teachers who were motivated by other things, or they were actually teachers not because of a love of education and not motivated by wanting the best from their students, to be honest, which is problematic, I think, for a teacher. I think it's a job that, fortunately, I think most people are tempted to do because of a love of teaching, not because of a love of money, for example, but there are other reasons why people may well be teaching. So, there was some discussion about evaluation, but it is still very contentious, apparently, according to what is written in the article. And there's an ongoing debate about what means can be used to determine a teacher's performance. So how do you evaluate whether a teacher is effective? Do you do it through student learning outcomes or through teacher evaluations, through observations, for example? There are also arguments against the use of students' learning outcomes as the only means of teacher evaluation, because there are so many different factors that can affect student test scores, for example, outside of teachers' performance. And they include parental support, resources available in the school or to the teacher, curriculum content and learning materials. And then the children's background, their economic and social background, can also play a very important role in their learning achievement. In Korea, one of the delegates at the conference mentioned that teachers in primary and secondary education are evaluated every year. And this evaluation includes a performance evaluation. They determine the knowledge of the subject that the teacher teaches, which I thought was quite interesting. And classroom observation with mentoring and feedback was also mentioned, that is important and as an effective way of evaluating teachers. Through observation, it was said that focus can be placed on the instructional practice and things such as on-the-spot decision-making and depth of instruction. I think the problem with that, for me, is that each class can be different. So a teacher can be observed teaching one particular class or another, and the difference between them may be enormous depending on all sorts of factors, including, in particular, I think, as Hattie mentioned in his article, the students. What are the students there? They may be very different. Another question that came up was about the impact of incentives on teachers' performance, with one delegate speaking about, again, in Korea, teachers are very well paid, higher than average that is the average in most countries. And that delegate mentioned that autonomy in the classroom and professional development opportunities were the key to teachers' performances, they had found. Finland, what a surprise, was also present, and it was said that an important emphasis can be found on teachers, should be made on teachers' autonomy, where in Finland a lot of leeway is given to teachers and how they organize the school day. Finally, it was suggested that teacher development programs should also focus on allowing teachers to go further than transmitting knowledge. One of the delegates made a point of saying that the teacher is also a learner, a thinker, and an inquirer, and said that teachers are not just preparing students for the job market, but also preparing future citizens, and this should be taken into account. So some interesting stuff there, I think. In particular, I think it's interesting to see how the topic is of concern in countries all over the world. So it is something that is believed that educational systems, policymakers should be thinking about and looking at the evidence. The next article is entitled What Makes a Great Teacher? And the source of this is the Economic World Forum. The author of this, Conrad Hughes, is director of the International School in Geneva, and he mentions Hattie's research as well as studies by others, including the OECD, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This article starts out to answer the question that before you can answer what makes a great teacher, you first have to look at what makes a good teacher, which makes sense. And the author states that this is a difficult question to answer because there are so many different variables. This is coming out in all of the research and studies. So it's difficult to carry out live research in live classrooms, and quantitative research in particular is flawed. And then the student factor, as mentioned in Hattie's studies, makes it difficult to measure the effect a teacher may have. Qualitative methods are also flawed. Focus groups and interviews are one way of looking into this, but generalizing findings is contentious. Student surveys are often used by schools, for example, because they're easy to administer, but these surveys are problematic and they can't be properly screened for biases. And then there are globalized tests, in particular the big ones such as PISA that rank countries and point to a couple of the countries such as Finland and Singapore as being potentially worth studying when it comes to good or great teaching. But the author mentions it is very dangerous to try and apply a set of practices that work in one country, because each country has a very different history, very different demographics, culture, sociology, political framework, economy, languages, and curriculum. So it's very difficult to transfer the things that make good teaching apparent in one country to another. Context, it comes back again to context. So that comes out in this article as well. So great teaching is not the predictable, observable, externally measurable thing that a lot of people would like it to be. And the problem is, if you treat it as such, this can lead to the adoption, the author says, of absurd policies when education systems try to pinpoint one or two particular aspects of what is assumed is great teaching and try to manufacture it elsewhere. So this could be it asking teachers, for example, to talk less in the classroom, to start or stop their lessons in a particular way, cancelling homework or giving more homework, or stopping the grading of students, or grading in another particular way, etc. These efforts are often the results of the educationalists cherry-picking something from recent research reports and often not reading the research from cover to cover, or understanding the other factors and nuances embodied and embedded within its pages that they say need to be taken into account. The author here goes on to emphasize that great teachers are context specific, that teaching only works within a defined context, as we said, and so casting doubt upon whether anyone can speak of great teaching in a generalized way. How can you compare, for example, he says, the sports coach, the PhD supervisor, the online undergraduate program lecturer, the beginner's language teacher, the teacher interacting with students with severe learning difficulties, the personal trainer, the grandmother telling a story, the highly methodical and conscientious teacher with low voice projection and bad handwriting, the charismatic, larger-than-life figure who nonetheless forgets certain tasks, the teacher who has a discussion with students that has nothing to do with whatever test is being run to decide where there is value added. This is, I think, a very powerful argument. And as the author says, each of these teachers can be a great teacher in very different ways. So learning and teaching are very much subject dependent, and this is why many initiatives aimed at boosting teacher effectiveness does not work. One the author mentions is the Gates Foundation, which poured hundreds of millions of dollars into an experiment designed to boost teaching effectiveness through traditional approaches such as classroom observations, careful recruitment, and performance bonuses. And they found that these created no significant gains in student learning. Despite this, the author continues to discuss what makes a great teacher, and he points to the Sutton Trust analysis in 2014 of 200 pieces of research analysed by the Global Schools Leader Group, as well as the Hattie study mentioned earlier. And if I have time, I think I'll take a close look at the other two soon. But to go back to this article, it said that what is encouraging is that much of the findings make a lot of sense, that they're not counterintuitive. For example, he says that few would argue that teachers knowing their subject matter or teachers believing in their students are contentious. If anything, they're obvious. Likewise, the idea that assessment not improving learning is pretty accepted or obvious. He goes on to explore the idea of culture being important, looking at a number of examples of different countries where students and teachers hold very different cultural values, which mean good or great teaching in those contexts would be hard to transfer to others. Again, this idea of good and great teaching is being very context specific is mentioned. And the author also suggests that allowing teachers to be independent is very important. So giving teachers the opportunity to set their own goals, trusting teachers to be professionals, trusting them to manage their own ecosystem and identify what is meaningful to the students is probably a very good idea. This, he goes on to say, is because great teaching isn't predictable and it's not usual for it to be externally measurable. It's often not observable either. There are too many nuances and areas of context that change when the learners change. And depending on the time of day, of course, and the time of year and the mood of the students, etc. This doesn't mean, however, that there are not clear indicators of what a good or great teacher should do or does do, or the skills that they need to implement. Feedback, again, is mentioned. It must be given. Everyone needs to be treated with respect. You need to care for every child. You need to treat learners as individuals with their own needs. All of these are important, but there is no formula that can be easily developed so that any teacher can implement it in their own classroom. In short, it boils down to the skill and experience of each individual teacher.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Introducing My New Term, the revolutionary technology application connecting schools and candidates directly. Whether you're a school seeking to streamline your recruitment process or a candidate searching for your next role in education, My New Term has the solution. Developed by a former teacher, the technology at My New Term now connects tens of thousands of candidates with schools every month by digitizing the recruitment process. As a candidate, you can search for jobs, set up recommended jobs, and save time by applying directly to schools via a standardized online process. No more completing manual and repetitive application forms. Employers can streamline processes and save time utilizing the leading applicant tracking system for schools and multi-academy trusts. Recruitment in education has been broken for too long. My New Term is on a mission to change just that. Visit mynewterm.com to learn more, search all the latest opportunities, or schedule a demo. My New Term, shaping the future of education recruitment.
And hello, everyone, and welcome again to those who have just joined us. You're listening to the Twilight Show on Teachers Talk Radio, and I would love to hear from anyone who would like to call in and talk. That would be great to discuss. I'm discussing with myself, looking at the research and some opinions on what is the nature of great teaching and what it is to be a good or great teacher. And before we go on, I'd just like to sort of have a look at some of the interesting things that some of the people listening in live have been putting into the chat. Chris Fry, hello Chris, is based in Barcelona, and he has been putting in quite a few things about what he thinks is the secret to great teaching. But he does say that if you think you have the secret to great teaching, and I think this is a really good point, and you try to impose this on teachers, then you'll kill something. It certainly won't raise the level of teaching. And I definitely think that, yeah, it is trying to identify it is a bit like trying to catch lightning in a bottle, but it still doesn't stop people. There's a lot of research on this and a lot of opinions about it to try and better understand it, I think. And what else have we got here? Expert teachers or expert learners, which is also from Chris, and I think that is a definite thing. And yeah, lots more there. So come and join us in the chat if you're listening in, but not actually in the studio. It would be great to hear you take part in these discussions, and especially if you want to join me live to speak about this. I'm going to move on now to the Sutton Trust report from 2014, which was referenced in the last article that I've just explored, as I mentioned earlier. This report is all about a review of 200 pieces of research, and the aim is to identify the elements of teaching with the strongest evidence of improving attainment. So looking at what makes a great teacher, with the idea of focusing on great teachers are teachers who can get results, measurable, evidence-based results in their students. And it finds some common practice that can be harmful to learning and which has no grounding in research. So it tries to identify things that perhaps some teachers are doing that they should stop doing, which is interesting because, again, Tom Rogers in the chat did actually say, what about the question, what isn't a great teacher? So this report, to a certain extent, talks a little bit about that. And that is quite interesting. So specific practices that the report says are not supported by evidence that some teachers are definitely involved in include using praise lavishly, allowing learners to discover key ideas by themselves, which is kind of interesting, this idea of discovery learning, of trying to lead the learners to the aha moments, grouping students by ability, apparently doesn't really have, is not supported by the evidence, and presenting information to students based on their preferred learning style. And that is something that still exists a lot in classrooms, and you still find it in books, etc. But there is no real evidence that learning styles has any real positive effect upon the attainment of students. The two factors that the report says has the strongest evidence of improving pupil attainment are teachers' content knowledge, including their ability to understand how students think about a subject and identify common misconceptions, which I think is good, and quality of instruction, which includes using effective strategies like questioning and the effective use of assessment. And then in this overview, it also says that there are the following specific practices which they have good evidence of improving attainment. And this is challenging students to identify the reason why something is taking place in the lesson, asking a large number of questions and checking the responses of all students, spacing out study or practice on a given topic with gaps in between for forgetting, and making students take tests or generate answers even before they have been taught the material. So lots of interesting stuff to be explored in this. And I am don't think I'm going to go into too much detail. Those are the main findings, and I recommend you read the entire report, as some of the details are very interesting. For instance, they define great teaching, as I mentioned above, as that which leads to improved student progress, which is a more limited definition than we've seen mentioned by others, but it makes sense given that is the main reason why teachers do what they do, I suppose. And they outline also what they think of as the 6 components of great teaching. These are, number 1, content knowledge, which was mentioned earlier. So strong evidence of impact on student outcomes. This is what this happens. Chris in the chat is saying the research isn't restricted to language teachers, and he would be interested to read some research on language teaching. And I think that is really interesting, Chris, because I think one of the things I definitely thought when I was reading the Hattie reports was that a lot of what was in his research was very much general. And I think in particular, although that research had a lot to say about subject teaching, I think there's something particularly different about teaching a skill such as a language, which needs to be approached in a different way. So I definitely agree with you. I would love to see a kind of focus on what makes a great language teacher, particularly as you and I, Chris, are language teachers, so that is of great interest to us. But even so, I think this is interesting to look at the generalizations of great teaching. I think you can certainly learn something about it. Now, about the content knowledge, this report does say that the most effective teachers have deep knowledge of the subjects they teach, and when this knowledge falls below a certain level, it impedes student learning, which again, I think is kind of obvious. I think it says, as well as a strong understanding of the material being taught, teachers must understand the ways students think about the content and are able to evaluate and change the way they teach based on this, and have knowledge of what methods students can use to learn and identify common conceptions that students may well have. All of that makes sense to me. Quality of instruction is also mentioned here as having a strong evidence of impact on student outcomes, which again feels a bit obvious, but it's good to see. And this includes elements such as effective questioning and use of assessments by teachers, and specific practices like reviewing and revising previous learning and providing model responses for students, then giving adequate time to practice so that students can embed the skills and knowledge securely, and progressively introducing new learning, i.e. scaffolding. These are all elements of high quality instruction. So there's a lot there that I think teachers already know, and they've learned this is how they should be doing things in the classroom, but it's definitely good to see it evidenced in this way in this report. The classroom climate has there's moderate evidence of impact on student outcomes according to the report, and this covers everything from the quality of interactions between the teachers and the students, the expectations of the teachers, the need to create a classroom environment that is demanding of the students, which I think is interesting, that doesn't just provide a low level of challenge, but also still recognizes the value of student self-worth. And it also involves attributing student success to their effort rather than just their ability, which is quite interesting, I think, and valuing resilience to failure. So this idea of if you want to succeed, well, you have to at some point you're going to fail, and you shouldn't, as a learner, be give up. Basically, you should go back and try again. And one of the things I always liked about the idea of what you can learn from video games is that in order to progress in a good video game, you need to fail, and you need to fail a lot of times. But you also need then to understand and reflect on what it was that you did wrong within the video game, and actually try to approach things in a different way and try again and again and again until you actually succeed, which I think is something that successful learners do as well. And it seems that this idea of resilience to failure is mentioned in this evidence in this report as well. Classroom management has there's moderate evidence of impact on student outcomes, according to the report. So the teacher's abilities to make efficient use of lesson time, to coordinate classroom resources and the space, and to manage behavior with clear rules that are consistently enforced. So again, all very good suggestions, and it's good to see that this coming out as being important. They're all relevant to maximizing the learning that can take place. And of course, if a teacher has poor classroom management or isn't able to help the students focus on the learning, then it stands to reason that the learning will not take place, basically. So these environmental factors are necessary for good learning to take place, rather than directly influencing the actual learning. So they're kind of components that are a given for learning to take place. Teacher beliefs comes up next, which has some impact. There's some evidence of impact on student outcomes. So why teachers adopt particular practices, what they decide to do in their classrooms, for what reasons, their theories of learning, how students learn, what good learning is and how it happens, and their conceptual modules of the nature and role of teaching within that learning process are all important. And welcome to, I hope I get your name right, Sadegh Alishani, who has joined us live as well, a language teacher from Iran. And that's great to have you here. And if you would like to dial in and talk to me, Sadegh, I'm sure I'm pronouncing your name wrong, so apologize for that. And if you want to talk about, I see you're interested in talking about strategies to motivate students in middle school. That would be great to talk to you about that and what you think about this idea of great teaching and great teachers. So please let me know in the chat and I'll bring you in if you would like to talk, Sadegh. Otherwise, thank you for commenting, and please continue to put whatever comments you have or questions into the chat here, and I'll address them. So back to this article, teacher beliefs. That was the last one, and the final one is about professional behaviours. So the idea of this having some evidence of impact on student outcomes, and it's the behaviours exhibited by teachers that is important. We are, after all, role models to our students. I always remember one of the things I made a point of doing with my students is making sure that I had books around me, that I would have books, and I wouldn't draw attention to them. I would just have them on the desk, etc. And not just books related to the subject, but books such as novels, etc. And quite often I found that students were really interested in that. And yeah, so behaviors exhibited by teachers, the ones that are mentioned in the report, are reflecting on and developing professional practices, participation in professional development, which is so important. And I will be coming back to that, I think. Supporting colleagues and liaising and communicating with parents. All of these are important things that has an impact on student outcomes. The role of the parent, I think, is really interesting in the whole cycle of learning of students. And I think, if you have parents who are supportive and want to actually help, then that makes such a big difference. And I think that being encouraged by teachers, it's clear from this evidence that this is something that is really important. What does the report recommend? Well, I leave you to read the report to read about the main, the details of the recommendations, but it does suggest that assessing teacher quality is important. Their recommendation is to do this through multiple measures, including classroom observation and measuring student attainment. We've already seen how in the other article that I was talking about, these are problematic, but it doesn't surprise me that if you're a policymaker or even a school leader, etc., that you would want to try and look at how to evaluate teacher quality, and especially as we learned from Hattie, is such an important factor within the whole equation of learning and teaching. But again, it isn't something that a lot of teachers, I think, feel comfortable about. So it's something that has to be, understandably, has to be approached in a very sensitive way, I think. The rest of the report, this focuses on details, and it's definitely worth the time it takes to read. There's a lot of desk research and other sources mentioned that I'm sure are worth following up on as well. And if I have time, that whole thing about the time is so important, isn't it? Then I'll definitely follow up on some of those. So that report is a Sutton Trust report from 2014 about what makes a great teacher. Right. The other source I mentioned before reading that article was written in 2021, and it's an article about by global school leaders outlining research into how teacher expectations empower student learning. So it's more specific than some of the other things we've looked at. And here's a section from the beginning of the article that I found really interesting and hope you will do too. We recently surveyed school leaders and teachers from India, Kenya, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and found that only 48% of teachers in our sample believe that all students can learn, regardless of familial background or educational experience. This confirms a comprehensive World Bank survey of 16,000 teachers from 8 low and middle income Latin American, African, and Asian countries, which found that a substantial portion of teachers believe they can't help students who start out below grade level or come from troubled homes. Wow, what do you think of that? Of course, if the teachers teaching students don't believe in their learners' ability to learn, it makes sense that those students are actually going to have real difficulty in actually learning. So it was mentioned before in some of the other articles and research reports that a great teacher needs to believe in their students. So it follows that if a teacher doesn't think their students can learn, then this won't help them at all. And interesting to see that this is also the source of that statistic is a 2018 World Bank report. So this article goes on to say that if teachers underestimate the abilities of their students because of various reasons, that students do underestimate the abilities of their students because of reasons. A lot of these reasons have to do with social attitudes and community prejudices. And in low-income countries in particular, the high social gap between teachers and students, which often exists, this can reduce teacher empathy and motivation to work with their students. And this is, by all accounts from this article, is quite common in many contexts and countries. And it's a shame to hear that, I think. And Random, hello, Random. Sorry, I saw you're trying to ring in before. If you'd like to, if you'd like me to bring you in, I can do that. Actually, I didn't know because you hadn't said. I didn't want to bring you in without knowing your background. But I see you're a home educator with two boys who have special educational needs, 13 and 11, and you've chosen to home educate it. If you would like to come in, and I'd love to talk to you, then please ring in again. Please ask to be brought in, and we can speak about that. Love to hear from you. And here you are. So let me just bring in Random Wren. Hello there. Oh, doesn't look like I can bring you in. Let me try again.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, is that working all right?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Is
Right.
Random your first name, or is that a nickname?
No, this is just my profile name. So my actual name's Kate.
Okay. Hi, Kate. Nice
Hi.
to speak to
Nice
you,
to meet
and
you.
thanks for calling in. So I'd love to hear more about. We haven't even covered anything about home educators. What is it that made you choose to educate your boys at home?
So they're obviously special. That it was obvious to me quite early
Mm-hmm.
on that my eldest was just going to suit being at home
Yeah.
better because he's autistic. So he was
Right.
very. I didn't realise at that age, I could see the sort of red flags around sort of like 2 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
which is obviously when the pressure starts to kind of get your children onto sort of waiting lists for preschools and, so they have a better chance to get into the early years and all of that. So at that point, when they were that little, which was obviously a decade ago now, um, I was much more driven towards. I'd done a lot of research into sort of Montessori,
Yeah.
so rather than teaching, it's rather than the teacher being, everybody is learning from that individual and assuming that that person in that room is the expert. It was more of a cooperative um, kind of emphasis on you were sort of facilitating them teaching themselves, them
Yeah.
and just providing the right environment. So I
Right.
found a lot of the points that you've raised kind of obviously over the years I've done a lot. I'm a lot more experienced and they've gotten
Yeah.
older. And one of the biggest questions that I get kind of asked in many ways over the years is basically whether or not I'm qualified, as
Right.
what makes me able to teach. And I'd like to think that I've managed to adopt a lot of those points that were raised in that initial list. That I totally agree with a lot of those things, but I think the current system, as it is at the moment, I mean, like I say, just in the decade that I've been doing it, the difference in the class, because I've been electively home educating the whole time. My two have
Mm-hmm.
never been into a formal setting, but the difference in numbers now in my community, in my sort of home educating community of children that have tried school and are now home educated as a result of school,
Mm-hmm.
and there's sort of instances where the teacher. I've got nothing against teachers. I think they're doing the best they can, but
Mm-hmm.
I think they are just totally strangled in the red tape now. Teachers are just not able to teach. And one of the points that was raised was sort of the trust. Where has the trust gone? Where is the space in the classroom for sort of listening and, as you say, like what makes an expert teacher? One that can sort of move. Obviously what's being taught is important. When you've got so much in the curriculum to cover and you're trying to teach huge classrooms full of kids, I can understand why you need them all there and you need them all engaged and learning. But there just doesn't seem to, from the sort of conversations I've had over the years, there doesn't seem to be any room for listening to the children, enough. There is room, obviously, but there
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be enough flexibility for teachers to just kind of just move, or just kind of move with the kids, follow what sparks their interest, and then bring in something else. There has to be a proof of learning all the time. I think like something has to be written down. It's not enough that maybe that classroom just had like a really good chat, like a really good exchange of ideas, and all the kids left like buzzing. It has to be like a worksheet or a lesson plan, and I think it's just not working, is it? It's not working. We've got like huge increases in teachers leaving their positions, and they're not just leaving them because they're teachers themselves are just stretched and
Yeah.
struggling. And it's just very upsetting, I think, to see.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you've said a lot of really, really good points there. There's so much I'd love to ask you about, or talk to you about here. I think the first thing is that I think you're absolutely right that there's so many pressures upon teachers and schools nowadays. Large classrooms, a lot of things that are required of anyone who is managing a class, that makes it very difficult in the time that they have and the numbers of individuals that they have to cater for, to give the kind of personal attention that a lot of these students require, as well as trying to get to know them enough to be able to cater for their needs or their interests, etc. All of these things, particularly when it comes to depending on the age of the students, are so important. What I think is really interesting, and I think teachers do it. I have to think that teachers do a wonderful job, given all of the constraints.
Absolutely.
And I can see that you don't dispute that. What I think is really interesting, though, is this idea of homeschooling has become so much more popular and influential. And I wondered, this is something that you did before the pandemic, but I think probably we've seen an increase in the number of parents who do that because of the pandemic, isn't it? I wondered, as you're in touch with that community, whether it's something that parents perhaps have decided they're able to do, whereas prior to the pandemic, when they hadn't tried teaching their own children, perhaps they thought it was going to be too difficult or too time consuming. Because I imagine it's a massive demand on your time to be able to do that, especially with, with your dyslexic son.
I've got an autistic. My eldest is autistic, and then my youngest is more. Well, initially he kind of presented more as like an ADHD ball of energy that doesn't stop. But he is also dyslexic, I think. And having the two has been incredibly interesting, because it's like I've studied the whole realm of sort of teaching and
Yeah.
trial and error as well to get my two to kind of learn anything. I have to say, so as I said, when I first started out, I was all in my head. It was like my house was going to be Montessori, everything was going to be there, and it was going to be more driven and focused on. I had all these lovely, wonderful ideas and resources about how to teach so-called kind of boring ideas, but it was just going to be like, as long as I taught it in a fun way, that was going to be enough. They'd be really engaged, and you kind of have to completely let go of that ego,
Mm.
and think, because I remember one instance, for example, I was going to teach them all about spring and Easter, and I was like, I don't want to go down the kind of chocolate eggs route. I want to really kind of get this essence of new life and time of year. And they were just not interested in that at all. And I got really kind of cross with them, as I imagine many teachers teaching whatever it is they're teaching. You can't help but get really frustrated because apart from anything else, you need to have ticked some boxes. You've put all this effort into a lesson plan. Oh, sorry. He's
It's
my
okay.
dog. Shush. That was the reason I was a bit cautious about ringing in. And you need to be ready to kind of go with the flow a little bit, because it may be that you just start losing your class entirely, and which is what happened, and I ended up making origami jumping frogs, I think, in the end, which has nothing to do with Easter. But they
It
had fun.
probably is now related to Easter in your boys' minds.
Well, exactly. And I think I learned quite early on that what is most important, whether it's at home or in class, and whether you're teaching 100 kids or one, is the experience of learning. Like whoever is in the class, whoever's leaving the class, they have to be left thinking that was good-ish, at least, like that, because what we're seeing in the home ed thing is, yes, a lot of it is post-COVID, because I think a lot of families, to be honest, I think it was more to do with the fact that COVID forced the issue of whether school, and again, I've got nothing against most teachers, but it is most teachers, and it's some schools and most schools and stuff, but there has been a huge increase in sort of our children's mental health and school trauma and things. And COVID gave a lot of families the opportunity to realise that actually a lot of SEND kids or where behaviour was an issue, that actually school was the cause. And COVID was kind of it just forced that issue, because children were forced to stay at home, and suddenly these kids are happier, and families by extension, because they didn't have to drag their kids into school. They didn't have to worry about uniforms and sensory issues and fitting this schedule necessarily. That said, I think it's also raised a lot of issues in our community where we are getting lumped together into all children that are homeschooled are kind of, what they were showing on the news was really awful. It was families that were feeling like they were going to have to keep their kids up. There was all this language used at the time about kids falling behind, and because obviously those children were going to be expected to rejoin, and so they had to keep up with that curriculum. So it was lots of footage of families sitting around tables with like different age children at different stages in their education, multiple subjects, between the hours of 9 and 3 or whatever. And so I've had to, that's been a lot of conversations I've had with people where they're like, so, because in their head, that is what home education is, because they've now seen this footage online. And it's like, actually, it's nothing like that for most of us that were doing it before that. Some families do it like that, obviously, but it depends on the child. And it's just a really interesting, and like I say, because a lot of people have seen it that way, they doubt their own ability of whether or not they can teach. Like I say, that this idea of teaching, and that is a delivery of information, and then it's like one of the other bits of something else you read about whether or not it's the content, of what's in there, and testing the teacher's knowledge of the subject they're teaching, and making sure that that's kind of drilled into the brain of the learner, sort of thing. And but if they're not receptive to whatever it is you're saying, if they're not receptive, then it's not going anywhere really. So it's I think that first list you read out was, I mean, that just hit all the nails on, for me, I think a lot of that. But that does come from experience, as you said. The less experienced teacher is always going to be, they're going to want to tick their boxes. They're standing there, they're teaching maths. They need to have done what, X, Y, and Z in that classroom. And so they're not going to be as practiced at kind of allowing the lesson, or like the volume of the lesson, and the sort of interaction between students. They'll kind of be keener to knock everything on the head before it gets to a level that they may find uncomfortable, unmanageable. It becomes sort of crowd management then, doesn't it, rather than crowd control.
I think a lot of this, Kate, is really interesting. I think it's very different, isn't it? I'm sure you appreciate, to teaching a large number of students in a classroom to teaching your own children at home.
Yeah.
And you can give, if you have the time, which you obviously have, and the motivation and the ability to learn about teaching and learning in the way that you've done, which I think is fabulous, then I think that is that's so great. And it's probably the best thing you can do, what you're doing now, homeschooling your two boys, especially as they have special educational needs. It's probably the best thing you can do, and I'm sure they'll grow up to appreciate that, and what you're doing is great. There are some comments in the chat which I'm going to address that Tom is talking about, etc. It's quite interesting, but I think it is, as Tom says, working in a school is a very different kettle of fish. You have you've mentioned that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You have.
I mean, don't forget, I went to school.
Of course,
I have that experience of being schooled in a very good school. Which actually I didn't like. It didn't really support me as an individual. And I've spoken to a lot of teachers over the years, and I've also run a very small. I've got some experience of sort of teaching more than just my own, and in different ways. But I appreciate absolutely the different, and also the sort of postcode lottery. There's a big difference between a little village school tucked away in the Cotswolds, where I am,
of course,
to up north, where you've got goodness knows how many, and all the different sort of socioeconomic, like where these kids are coming from where
Yeah.
they're growing up, the families behind that, etc.
Yeah.
So
I also
think
think that there's a lot of parents who they don't have the time. They need to go and work.
well, yeah,
They're not able to homeschool and stuff. So there's a lot of different factors, I think, which is really at play here. But it does sound like you have found a solution that works really well for your boys, and that you have learned enough about teaching and learning that you're able to give them what they need and what they want, which is great. One of the things I wondered, though, because I always wonder this about homeschooling, and it is mentioned sometimes when homeschooling is
is it going to
discussed.
be socialization?
That's exactly it. I wondered
Going to be the S
what you
word?
think
That's what
about
we
that.
refer it to.
And
What
how
do we
how
think
you
about that?
approach that. The idea of, one of the things that I think kids definitely get out of being at school is that they get to
Yeah.
interact with a lot of different other kids. I think from a
Yes,
lot of
because
different
we're
places,
all sitting
backgrounds,
here
etc.
at home,
And this
shut
really
in.
influences them, doesn't it? So, what do you think about that? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Well, okay, so let's put the myth to bed immediately that home
Mhm.
education happens behind a closed door at home, because it
Sure.
mostly doesn't. If we're at home, we're kind of a bit fed up, to be honest. So there is an absolutely huge, especially post COVID, there is a
Yeah.
huge home educating community. There are individual Facebook groups for basically
Yeah.
every county out there. There's also a
Mhm.
huge UK like umbrella kind of group. There are cooperative kind of groups, I suppose, that meet where the emphasis is on kind of learning specific things. I think it. I mean, I personally, because I've got my two, and it's all quite flexible, and it has to be quite low demand. My personal experience is we've been to a lot of groups and meetups over the years that are not. It's not about teaching. It's just about being around kids, other
Yeah.
people, other families. I think the benefit of home ed is that, personally speaking, and also for all the families that we've met, is that you end up with a group of children of all different levels, all different ages. You don't get, which you don't necessarily find at school. I mean, I've got two siblings with 2 years apart. If they'd gone into the different um, year groups,
Yeah.
then I don't think that they'd have the relationship. And that's not just our family. That's just all home ed families. All of the siblings and all of the kids. There's just not that same emphasis on sort of
Mhm.
boys and girls and ages and levels. Like, they all learn off each other.
Yeah.
There's a lot more freedom for them to kind of form much deeper relationships with each other, friendships and
Mhm.
things,
Mhm.
because it's not just about the peer groups and classes that they've been divided into, which is based on their age, or
Yeah.
worse still, if they're sort of put on tables based on their abilities, which is awful, but it's still happening.
Mhm. Mhm.
There isn't that competitive. I mean, there's healthy competition and things
Mhm.
depending on what you're attending, but there's not. We're obviously not testing our kids in quite the same
Yeah.
way, and it's certainly not emphasized. Even I mean, I haven't quite got there yet with sort of GCSE and
Yeah.
IGCSE sort of stuff, um, but I know families that have, and
Mhm.
they manage quite well. But certainly our younger kids aren't subjected to sort of standardized testing and all
Yeah.
of that sort of stuff that knocks their self-esteem, and it's yeah. But in terms of socialization, as I say, like, they are fine. There's plenty
Great.
of,
That's really
like I
good to
said,
hear.
and I mean also you get the mums and dads. It's very much a sort of family
Community.
affair. So you've got adults.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, the kids get to kind of talk to and trust and engage with adults. So they tend to be a lot. I'm trying to err away from this idea that we're doing it better. We're doing it differently, and school will 100% work and be absolutely the right choice for many,
Yeah.
many children. I attended a grammar school, as I said,
Yeah.
and my best friend, that was the best place for her to be. She ended up doing medicine.
Yeah.
And she was one of those ones with, you know, full sets of gel pens and all of that. But it was, by complete contrast, the worst place for me to be,
Yeah.
because I needed that flexibility and sort of way to kind of spend more time on my special interests
Mhm.
and then go on to something totally different. But um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I answered your question then.
No,
I'll go on. I think
definitely,
I went
Kate.
off on a bit of a
It,
tangent.
it's really interesting because I've never really spoken at length or to any great extent to anyone who is involved in homeschooling. So this is fascinating.
Oh,
And
God. I'm
it
just trying not to
sounds,
offend anybody.
no, I think, everyone is entitled to their opinions and, and you have your experience. What I think is really interesting is it sounds to me that it's not so much homeschooling that you're involved in, but almost like community schooling. So you've actually
Yeah.
managed to find an alternative school for your kids and give them a kind of um, more individual attention than they would have got at the other school, if you like. And your
Yeah.
connection, it's obviously a very um, committed and connected to a whole community of other parents who are homeschooling, other kids who are homeschooling. You're addressing the kind of usual things like socialization and stuff that I mentioned that perhaps would be missing from some circumstances where parents were not able, perhaps they were stuck at home, not able to leave, which a lot of which
Yeah, I
those
mean, I'm one of those
problems
as
were.
well a lot of the time, or I was when they were younger.
Yeah, and they
Um,
were
I
those kind of
Yeah,
things were identified during the pandemic when
yeah.
kids were stuck at home and not able to kind of socialize with things. So I think that if anything has come out that is positive from the pandemic, it's that idea of if you're going to homeschool, then being part of a large community, an alternative school, if you like, is such an important thing. I don't know if you agree that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, I thought I'd been
loud and clear.
disconnected. Um, yeah, I think what's been great is there has been more an increase in flexi schooling. I think more um,
Mhm.
post pandemic, sort of where children maybe weren't in a great hurry to kind of get back in schooling. I think that sort of forced that conversation a little bit more, which definitely works
Yeah.
well for many families where it's not necessarily about being at school, it's just
Uh-huh.
the demand it places, the sort of whole school day and the whole school week. Um, a lot of children still want to attend school. You know, it's not the worst place in the world, but maybe every day, 5 days a week, longer and longer days, and with all the kind of increase in emphasis around their behaviour and these sort
Mhm.
of sanctions and stuff that seem to be coming into effect more and more lately.
Mhm.
Um, it the idea of sort of flexi schooling, as I say, and just different approaches to what education can look like. I think the whole system, like, to me, a school building is great. I think it offers this incredible place that we could teach a lot of children en masse, but we're just approaching it in this just very old-fashioned way of where we're just insisting that they'd be separated by age, and there just needs to be a little bit more space, like I say, where
Mhm.
where teachers are allowed to teach, children are allowed to sort of move around a little bit more, and focus in on their special interests a little bit
Yeah.
more, and build on that. And if they need to um, move into a different space, like SEN learners might need to sort of take a break, or
Yeah.
just things like that, which they're just, like I say, there just seems to be so much red tape. Um,
I think I think
it's
there are I think what you're saying does describe a lot of schools. I think
yeah,
the interesting thing is this idea of school is changing. There are a lot of schools that are
mm,
run in different ways. There are schools that are still run on very traditional grounds, but there are also schools, teachers, and classrooms which are very different as well now, which is great. I think this
yeah,
idea of school not just being one type of thing is so
yeah,
important, and that it can mean lots of different things. For example, I think what you're doing is part of school. It's a school. It's a school where the parents are homeschooling and there's a
yeah,
community, etc. But that's school for me as well. It's not what most people in the UK, for example, imagine school is, but I think that's uh, essentially it. Um, which is great that there's so many different ways of doing it, and that there is, as you said, a lot of red tape, a lot of things that are that constrain teachers, but then a lot of those things that are in place, the rules that are in place, the constraints and um, the things to do with compliance are aimed to try and give um, most students a kind of similar experience and provide a kind of equality that would otherwise not exist. I mean, as
yeah.
I mentioned, it's if you can do what you're doing and give that individual attention to your boys as you're doing, that's fantastic. But I imagine that the majority of parents would not be able to do that, which is why
No,
there's still a
absolutely not.
need for school. It's just trying
Yeah,
to get schools to be able to be as fair and give as many equal opportunities to as many students as possible, and have the best type of teaching happen within them, the best type of learning, given the constraints, the budget constraints, the
well, this is it.
constraints, etc. Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Really?
Where are the lines now with school? Because, as you say, many people don't. Um, they don't necessarily. They can't home educate, but they also can't necessarily deliver on a lot of things. There are parents working ridiculous hours these days.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
what is school? I've heard school referred to by parents as kind of like childcare, like
yeah,
because
yeah.
they're
Well, that's
literally dropping. And I just think that's, you've still, if you're going to make the decision to bring a child into the world, there has to be, you know,
yeah,
parents need to be parenting and teachers need to be teaching. And I would have to say, not all parents are parenting um,
yeah, yeah,
enough, I think. Um, and there needs to be that cooperation between what's going on at home and what's going on at school, and that trust again. And I think that goes both ways. I think I've certainly heard um, stories where trust has broken down on both sides, you know, from where you've got schools, again, because of the pressures that they are under, might be reluctant to sort of be forthcoming about certain things that are going on at school, and then vice versa, you know. So, but that again, in the classroom environment or the relationships between teachers and their pupils, that's why, again, it's so important that there is that room for them to have conversations, because their teacher might be the only person that they have an opportunity to sort of disclose information to. You know, you're in this kind of privileged position where you might just pick up on something that leads on to some sort of further kind of knowledge of what is going on at home.
Yeah.
So it's like I say, it's having that, you know, the home ed community obviously offers that, because you've got mum and dad, or mum, you know, it's not just mums and dads anymore. You know, the way that families look these
Yeah.
days is totally different to sort of the nuclear family of
Of
the
course.
70s kind of thing. So, but mostly you've got kind of both parents and all of the siblings, whole kind of families sort of mixing up together. So we tend to kind of get a better idea of everybody's individual situations. And there's, you know, whereas school children, like I say, they're just, some of them are obviously, parents are parenting and stuff, but some of them are just sort of getting dropped off,
Yeah.
you know, shoved in.
Oh yeah.
And then you guys are supposed to just spit them out at the other end, you know, and they turned out all right, didn't they? Like, we turned out all right, didn't we? And it's like, did we though? Did we? I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
Like,
it's what you said about your friend for whom school was perfect. You know, my experience of school was very positive. My experience of university was different, but
yeah.
I won't go into that. Listen,
Well, I
Kate,
was going to say, university is, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it?
exactly.
That's an experience. That's nothing to do with learning. I don't.
Yeah, well,
That's certainly
it
what
can
I've
be
heard.
and it should be, but anyway, I haven't got time to go into that. In fact, I'm going to have to wind things up, Kate, because
Okay,
I've
yeah, that's
already
fine.
overrun a little while,
Oh,
and
sorry.
I've got to go. That's all right. It's been fascinating to talk to you. Thanks for coming and joining in, and for listening. And
It's a great
you've been
subject.
a great guest. So
Indeed.
if you want to come back and join me, we could even do a show on homeschooling if that's something you'd be interested. If
Oh, that
you're
would be great.
interested.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I don't know if you want
I
to.
don't know how to do that.
Well, if you want to, you would just join in the same way that you did today. But
Okay. I'll
um,
let you wind up the show, and presumably I can still chat in the.
yeah, in fact, if you look in the chat now, Tom's just put in an email address where you can if
Oh,
you want
okay.
to send an email there, then we can set something up, either myself
Okay.
or another host. But I've really enjoyed talking to you, so thank you for that. And I've definitely learned quite a lot about homeschooling that I didn't know before I spoke to you. So that's what this is all about. So thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you. Great show.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your weekend, Kate.
And you. Bye.
Bye. And so that brings us to the end of the show today. Thank you so much to Kate for calling in and talking about her experience of teaching and learning, and in particular with respect to the homeschooling that she's doing with her boys, which sounds fascinating. And I look forward to talking to Kate on another occasion with more detail, at more length about that, because I'd love to know more about that. So we have come to the end of today's show, the Twilight Show, and I would like to encourage you all to go to teachers.radio to listen to other shows. There are so many different shows about all sorts of different subjects, and I'm sure you'll find a lot to interest you there. I will be back again next week. I have a guest lined up, so I'm looking forward to that as well. But this has been an interesting experience. I always enjoy these types of shows as well, particularly when we have guests like Kate dial in unexpected. So I didn't get through what I prepared, but that's actually a really good thing. I think it's a much better show for that. So if you do want to join me in a particular show, then please get in touch. Or if you're listening and just want to call in, then as Kate did, that is always good as well. So please feel free to join in. It's what it's all about. Next week, as I said, I will be back at the same time, this time with a guest. And remember, there are all of these Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of different subjects, so check them out. Thank you so much for listening in live, everyone who has done so, and for your comments and questions, etc. And also thank you if you're listening back to this as a recording. You are also very happy to have been able to talk to you as well. That's all there is to say now. So goodbye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, week, or whenever it is that you're listening. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.